Hello, I'm Bruce Andrews. I'm here to shine a little light on a little-known poet of unusual verse. His name is Robert Service. I only know of him because of a recitation of one of his most famous poems, The Shooting of Dan McGrew, that occurred more than 60 years ago when I was attending Boy Scout camp in New Hampshire. One evening, while sitting around a council campfire with a glorious bonfire in the middle of our gathering of maybe 50 or 60 scouts and leaders, stars winking out overhead, an atmosphere thick with eager anticipation, one of the counselors got up and recited from memory this wonderful story, and I was immediately captivated. Since then, I've remained a faithful follower of Robert Service's Klondike verse. He was born in 1874 in Lancashire, England, one of 10 children, moved to Scotland, came over to Vancouver area and became a bank teller, but started writing verse for local publications. He became known as the Bard of the Yukon, even though he'd never actually experienced the Yukon or the Klondike Gold Rush. Dawson City was his home when his poems began to sell, and his fame grew. With his newfound wealth, he traveled to Paris and lived there until the outbreak of World War I, at which time he was turned down for active service at the age of 41, became an ambulance driver for the Red Cross during the war, and returned to Paris to live in relative luxury, continuing to write poetry, novels, and songs. He died at the age of 84 in 1958 in Lisieux, France. He called his own works verse, not poetry. I don't care what you call it, but I think you will agree that it's indeed a wonderful read. I have 6 of my personal favorites for you, including The Shooting of Dan McGrew and The Cremation of Sam McGrew. You can find them at the Shrewsbury Library. In the meantime, hang on for a wonderful and wild ride with Robert Service, the Bard of the Yukon. The Spell of the Yukon. I wanted the gold, and I sought it. I scrabbled and mucked like a slave. Was it famine or scurvy? I fought it. I hurled my youth into a grave. I wanted the gold, and I got it. Came out with a fortune last fall, yet somehow life's not what I thought it. And somehow the gold isn't all. No, there's land. Have you seen it? It's the cussedest land that I know, from the big dizzy mountains that screen it to the deep death-like valleys below. Some say God was tired when he made it. Some say it's a fine land to shun. Maybe, but there's some as would trade it for no land on earth, and I'm one. You can come to get rich, damned good reason. You feel like an exile at first. You hate it like hell for a season, and then you are worse than the worst. It grips you like some kind of sinning. It twists you from foe to a friend. It seems it's been since the beginning. It seems it will be to the end. I've stood in some mighty-mouthed hollow that's plumb full of hush to the brim. I've watched the big husky sun wallow in crimson and gold and grow dim, till the moon set the pearly peaks gleaming and the stars tumbled out neck and crop, and I've thought that I surely was dreaming, with the peace of the world piled on top. The summer, no sweeter was ever, the sunshiny woods all a-thrill, the grayling a-leap in the river, the bighorn asleep on the hill, the strong life that never knows harness, the wilds where the caribou call, the freshness, the freedom, the farness. Oh God, how I'm stuck on it all. The winter, the brightness that blinds you, the white land locked tight as a drum, the cold fear that follows and finds you, the silence that bludgeons you dumb. The snows that are older than history, the woods where the weird shadows slant. The stillness, the moonlight, the mystery, I've bade 'em goodbye, but I can't. There's a land where the mountains are nameless and the rivers all run God knows where. There are lives that are erring and aimless and deaths that just hang by a hair. There are hardships that nobody reckons. There are valleys unpeopled and still. There's a land, oh, it beckons and beckons, and I want to go back, and I will. They're making my money diminish. I'm sick of the taste of champagne. Thank God I'm skinned to a finish. I'll pike to the Yukon again. I'll fight, and you bet it's no sham fight. It's hell. But I've been there before, and it's better than this by a damn sight. So me for the Yukon once more. There's gold, and it's haunting and haunting. It's luring me on as of old. Yet it isn't the gold that I'm wanting so much as just finding the gold. It's the great big broad land way up yonder. It's the forests where silence has lease. It's the beauty that thrills me with wonder. It's the stillness that fills me with peace. The Spell of the Yukon. Now, a personal favorite of mine, the shooting of Dan McGrew. A bunch of the boys were whooping it up in the Malamute saloon. The kid that handles the music box was hitting a jagtime tune. Back of the bar in a solo game sat dangerous Dan McGrew, and watching his luck was his light of love, the lady that's known as Lou. When out of the night, which was 50 below, and into the din and the glare, there stumbled a miner fresh from the creek's dog dirty and loaded for bear. He looked like a man with a foot in the grave and scarcely the strength of a louse, yet he tilted a poke of dust on the bar and he called for drinks for the house. There was none could place the stranger's face, though we searched ourselves for a clue, but we drank his health, and the last to drink was dangerous Dan McGrew. There's men that somehow just grip your eyes and hold them hard like a spell, and such was he, and he looked to me like a man who had lived in hell. With a face most hair, and the dreary stare of a dog whose day is done, as he watered the green stuff in his glass, and the drops fell one by one. Then I got figuring who he was, and wondering what he'd do. And I turned my head, and there watching him was the lady that's known as Lou. His eyes went rubbering around the room, and he seemed in a kind of daze, till at last the old piano fell in a way of his wandering gaze. The ragtime kid was having a drink. There was no one else on the stool, so the stranger stumbles across the room and flops down there like a fool. In a buckskin shirt that was glazed with dirt he sat, and I saw him sway. Then he clutched the keys with his talon hands. My God, but that man could play. Were you ever out in the great alone when the moon was awful clear, and the icy mountains hemmed you in with a silence you most could hear? With only the howl of a timber wolf, and you camped there in the cold, a half-dead thing in a stark dead world, clean mad for the muck called gold. While overhead green, yellow, and red the north lights swept in bars? Then you've a hunch what the music meant. Hunger and night and the stars. And hunger not of the belly kind that's banished with bacon and beans, but the gnawing hunger of lonely men for a home and all that it means. For a fireside far from the cares that are, four walls and a roof above, but oh, so cram full of cozy joy, and crowned with a woman's love. A woman dearer than all the world, and true as heaven is true. God, how ghastly she looks through her rouge, the lady that's known as Lou. Then on a sudden the music changed, so soft that you scarce could hear. But you felt that your life had been looted clean of all that it once held dear, that someone had stolen the woman you loved, that her love was a devil's lie, that your guts were gone and the best for you was to crawl away and die. 'Twas the crowning cry of a heart's despair, and it thrilled you through and through. I guess I'll make it a spread misere with dangerous Dan McGrew. The music almost died away, then it burst like a pent-up flood, and it seemed to say, repay, repay, and my eyes were blind with blood. The thought came back of an ancient wrong, and it stung like a frozen lash, and the lust awoke to kill, to kill. Then the music stopped with a crash, and the stranger turned, and his eyes they burned in a most peculiar way. In a buckskin shirt that was glazed with dirt he sat, and I saw him sway. Then his lips went in a kind of grin, and he spoke, and his voice was calm. And boys, says he, you don't know me, and none of you care a damn. But I want to state, and my words are straight, and I'll bet my poke they're true, that one of you is a hound of hell, and that one is Dan McGrew. Then I ducked my head, and the lights went out, and 2 guns blazed in the dark, and a woman screamed, and the lights went up, and 2 men lay stiff and stark. Pitched on his head and pumped full of lead was dangerous Dan McGrew, while the man from the creeks lay clutched to the breast of the lady that's known as Lou. These are simple facts of the case, and I guess I ought to know. They say that the stranger was crazed with hooch, and I'm not denying it so. I'm not so wise as the lawyer guys, but strictly between us two, the woman that kissed him and pinched his poke was the lady that's known as Lou. The shooting of Dan McGrew. The Cremation of Sam McGee, another personal favorite of mine. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge, I cremated Sam McGee. Now, Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where his cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the South to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, though he'd often say in his homely way that he'd sooner live in hell. On a Christmas day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Talk of your cold. Through the parka's fold it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we'd closed, then the lashes froze till sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed and the stars o'erhead were dancing heel and toe, he turned to me and said, "Cap," says he, "I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking that you won't refuse my last request." Well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no. Then he says with a sort of moan, "It's the cursed cold, and it's got right hold, till I'm chilled clean through to the bone. Yet 'tain't being dead. It's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear that, foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains." A pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail, and we started on at the streak of dawn, but God, he looked ghastly pale. He crouched on the sleigh and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee, and before nightfall a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. There wasn't a breath in that land of death, and I hurried, horror-driven, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, "You may tax your brawn and brains, but you promised true, and it's up to you to cremate those last remains." Now, a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, in my heart how I cursed that load. In the long, long night by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows, oh God, how I loathed that thing. And every day that quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grow, and on I went, though the dogs were spent and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad and I felt half mad, but I swore I would not give in, and I'd often sing to the hateful thing, and it hearkened with a grin. Till I came to the marge of Lake LaBarge, and a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, but I saw in a trice it was called the Alice May. And I looked at it, and I thought a bit, And I looked at my frozen chum. Then, "Here," said I, with a sudden cry, "is my crematorium." Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying around, and I heaped the fuel higher. The flames just soared, and the furnace roared, such a blaze you seldom see. And I bored a hole in the glowing coal, and I stuffed in Sam McGee. Then I made a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so, and the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why. And the greasy smoke in an inky cloak went streaking down the sky. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out, and they danced about, ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, "I'll just take a peep inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked." Then the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar, and he wore a smile you could see a mile, and he said, "Please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plum Tree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm." There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge, I cremated Sam McGee. The baldness of chewed ear. When chewed-eared Jenkins got hitched up to Guinevere McGee, his flowing locks, ye recollect, was frivolous and free. But in old Hyman's jackpot, it's a most amazing thing, them flowing locks just disappeared like snowballs in the spring. Just seemed to wilt and fade away like dead leaves in the fall, and left old chewed-ear balder than a whitewashed cannonball. Now, Mrs. Chewed-ear Jenkins, that was Guinevere McGee, was just about as fine a draw as ever made a pair. But when the boys got joshing and suggested it was she that must be influential for the old man's slump in hair, why, Miss Chewed-ear Jenkins just went clean up in the air. "To demonstrate," says she that night, "the loving wife I am, I've bought a dozen bottles of Bink's Anti-Dandruff Balm. 'Twill make yet hair just sprout and curl like squash vines in the sun, and I'm proposed to sling it on till every drop is done." That hit old Chewed-ear's funny side, so he lays back and hollers, "The day you raise a hair, old girl, you'll get $1,000. Now, whether 'twas the prize or not is mighty hard to say, but Chewed-ear didn't seem to have much comfort from that day. With bottles of that dandruff dope, she followed at his heels and sprinkled and massaged him even when he ate his meals. She waked him from his beauty sleep with tender loving care and rubbed and scrubbed assiduous, yet never a sign of hair. Well, naturally, all the boys soon tumbled to the joke, and at the wow-wow social 'twas Cold Deck Davis spoke. "The little woman's working mighty hard on Chewed-ear's crown. Let's give her a 3/5 share, $100 down. We stand to make 500 clear, boys, drinking whiskey straight. Chewed-ear Jenkins Hirsute Propagation Syndicate." The boys was on and soon chipped in the necessary dust. They primed up a committee to negotiate the deal. Then Mrs. Jenkins yielded, being rather in disgust, and all was signed and witnessed and invested with a seal. They rounded up old Chewed-ear, and they broke at what they'd done, allowed they'd bought an interest in his chance of raising hair. They yanked his hat off anxious-like, opining one by one, their magnifying glasses showing fine prospects everywhere. They bought Hairleen and Thatcham and Jay's Capillary Juice and 7-something Sisters and Macassar and Bay Rum, and everyone insisted on his special right to sluice this special line of lotion onto Chewed-ear's cranium. They only got the merrier the more the old man roared, and shares in Jenkins' hirsute went sky-highin' on the board. The syndicate was hopeful that they'd demonstrate the pay, and Mrs. Jenkins labored in her persevering way. The boys discussed on-surface rights and outcrops and so on, and planned to have it crown surveyed and blueprints of it drawn. They ran a baseline, sluiced and yelled, and everyone was glad except the balance of the property, and he was mad. "It gives me pain," he interjects, "to squash your glowing dreams, but you was fools when you got in on this here hirsute scheme. You'll never raise a hair on me." When lo, that very night, preparing to retire, he got a most unpleasant fright. For on that shining dome of his, so prominently bare, he felt the baby outcrop of a second growth of hair. $1,000, suffering Caesar. Well, it must be saved. He grabbed his razor reckless-like and shaved and shaved and shaved. And when his head was smooth again, he gives a mighty sigh and sneaks away and buys some hair destroyer on the sly. So there was Mrs. Jenkins with restorer waging fight, and Chew Deer with destroyer circumventing her at night. The battle was a mighty one. His nerves was on the strain, and yet in spite of all he did, that hair began to gain. The situation grew intense, so quietly one day he gave his shareholders the slip and made his getaway. Just like a criminal, he skipped and aimed to defalcate the chewed-eared Jenkins hirsute propagation syndicate. His guilty secret burned him, and he sought the city's din. "I got to get a wig," says he, "to cover up my sin. It's growing night and day. It's most amazing hair." And when he looked at it that night, he shuddered with despair. He shuddered and suppressed a cry at what his optics seen, for on my word of honor, boys, that hair was growing green. At first he guessed he'd get some dye and tried to dye it black, and then he saw 'twas Nemesis was lying on his track. He must just face the music and confess the thing he'd done, and pay the boys in Guinevere the money they had won. And then there came a big idea. It thrilled him like a shock. Why not control the syndicate by buying up the stock? And so, next day he hurried back with smoothly shaven pate, and for $100 he bought up the syndicate. 'Twas mighty frenzied finance, and the boys set up a roar, but hirsutes from the market was withdrawn forevermore. And to this day in Nuggetsville they tell the tale how slick the syndicate sold out too soon, and Chew Deer turned the trick. The Logger. In the moonless, misty night, with my little pipe alight, I am sitting by the campfire's fading cheer. Oh, the dew is falling chill on the dim, deer-haunted hill, and the breakers in the bay are moaning drear. The toilful hours are sped, the boys are long abed, and I alone a weary vigil keep. In the sightless, sullen sky I can hear the nighthawk cry, and the frogs in frenzied chorus from the creek. And somehow the ember's glow brings me back the long ago, the days of merry laughter and light song, when I sped the hours away with the gayest of the gay in the giddy whirl of fashion's festal throng. Oh, I ran a grilling race and a little wrecked the pace, for the lust of youth ran riot in my blood. But at last I made a stand in this God-forsaken land of the pine tree and the mountain and the flood. And now I've got to stay with an overdraft to pay for pleasure in the past with future pain. And I'm not the chap to whine, for if the chance were mine, I know I'd choose the old life once again. With its woman's eyes a-shine and its flood of golden wine, its fever and its frolic and its fun, the old life with its din, its laughter and its sin, and chuck me in the gutter when it's done. Ah, well, it's past and gone, and the memory is wan that conjures up each old familiar face. And here by fortune hurled, I am dead to all the world, and I've learned to lose my pride and keep my place. My ways are hard and rough, and my arms are strong and tough, and I hew the dizzy pine till darkness falls, and sometimes I take a dive just to keep my heart alive among the gay saloons and dancing halls. In the distant, dinful town, just a little drink to drown the cares that crowd and canker in my brain. Just a little joy to still set my pulses all a-thrill, then back to the brutish labors once again. And things will go on so until one day I shall know that death has got me cinched beyond a doubt, Then I'll crawl away from sight, and morosely in the night my weary, wasted life will peter out. Then the boys will gather round, and they'll launch me in the ground, and pile the stones the timber wolf to foil. And the moaning pine will wave overhead a nameless grave, where the black snake in the sunshine loves to coil. And they'll leave me there alone, and perhaps with softened tone speak of me sometimes in the campfire's glow, as a played-out broken chum who has gone to kingdom come, and who went the pace in England long ago. One last clever little poem. Maternity. There once was a square, such a square little square, and he loved a trim triangle. But she was a flirt, and around her skirt vainly she made him dangle. Oh, he wanted to wed, and he had no dread of domestic woes and wrangles, for he thought that his fate was to procreate cute little squares and triangles. Now it happened one day, on that geometric way, there swaggered a big, bold cube with a haughty stare, and he made that square have the air of a perfect boob. To his solid spell the triangle fell, and she thrilled with love's sweet sickness, for she took delight in his breadth and height, but how she adored his thickness. So that poor little square just died of despair, for his love he could not strangle, while the bold cube led to the bridal bed that cute and acute triangle. The square's sad lot she has long forgot, and his passionate pretensions, for she dotes on her kids, oh, such cute pyramids in a world of 3 dimensions.